Hi everybody and welcome to the Ultimate Pattern Drafting Starter Kit. I am Kendra Weitzel and I have been a seamstress for a long time. I'm here to give you this presentation to teach you a little bit about the most important key ingredient in order that you need in order to start drafting your own pattern pieces easily from scratch. So I'm Kendra. It's awesome to meet you. If you already follow me on Instagram, that is awesome, and thank you so much. I've done a few posts on the topic of visualization, but I threw this presentation together just to give you a very good brief lesson in exactly how it works and why it is so important for you as a seamstress, beginner or expert, to have this skill with you at all times when you go to draft any pattern piece you need to complete any clothing design you need. So to get the most from this presentation, first, please save this presentation or take notes from the slides and be prepared to start taking action as you learn. So I have been a seamstress for about 23 years, probably longer, and I have been using commercial patterns for a lot of those years until I started graduating, or I graduated to drafting my own pattern pieces, but I'll get into that later. I have made projects big and small, anything from little tiny felt flowers that I've sewn by hand to full clothing projects that I've needed commercial patterns for, Renaissance costumes, and I spent quite a few years making my own cosplays, sewing them by hand and by machine in order to wear them myself. So I've had quite a lot of experience in sewing, in trial and error, in using commercial patterns, getting to know pattern pieces really well, being able to predict what pattern pieces are needed for really any type of project, and basically learning to graduate from commercial patterns to be able to draft my own pattern pieces from scratch, and from there being able to teach others exactly how to do the same thing so that y'all can experience the same creative freedom that I have now been able to experience myself for the last few years. So again, I started with commercial patterns, and I eventually graduated to drafting my own patterns using a very simple and automated process that I will get into a little bit later in this presentation. So we're going to talk about visualization. That's the entire point of this presentation, and that is the number one skill that you as a seamstress need to have in order to draft your own pattern pieces. So what does this mean? Visualization is the bread and butter of pattern making. It means that this is the most important, basically the most mandatory skill that you need to have as a seamstress moving forwards. And that is especially true if you want to stop using commercial patterns and draft your own pattern pieces, which I highly, highly encourage, because the creative freedom that comes from not having to rely on commercial patterns and being able to move into drafting your own pattern pieces, that creative freedom is enormous. It saves you so much time, so much money, and so much energy in being able to start any project that you want, know exactly how to use visualization to draft the pattern pieces that you need, and then you move so much quicker in the entire sewing process that you cut down your sewing project time significantly, but we'll talk about that later. So visualization is the ability to look at a three-dimensional clothing piece, whether that is a sleeve, a shirt front, a shirt back, a skirt front, skirt back, pants, whatever the case may be. It's one piece of clothing. For example, what I just said, sleeve, bodice, or a sleeve, and deconstruct that three-dimensional clothing piece into a one-dimensional flat pattern piece. And this skill is important because you need to be able to deconstruct three-dimensional objects into the one-dimensional pattern pieces that you'll be drafting in order to go back the other way and turn them into those three-dimensional clothing pieces once again by yourself with your own hands. So it's the ability to look at any design and being able to see in your mind what pattern piece you need to create in order to create that three-dimensional clothing piece. So here's a quick example of visualization. So you start with the far left picture, which is called a puff cuff. It's a regular sleeve, except for the very bottom. It's a little bit puffy, which means it's a little wider on the bottom. So in order to get there, you would start with the three-dimensional clothing piece, the desired result. You start at the end, and then you work your way back. The next thing you would look at is what pattern piece do you need to start with? What basic pattern piece? In this case, you would need to start with the sleeve. From there, you look at the basic pattern piece and say, how does this shape need to change in order to become that three-dimensional clothing piece? The answer is the next picture over, which is the same basic pattern piece shape, which is the sleeve. It's just changed, just tweaked a little bit. And then you would lay that out onto fabric, spread it out on the bottom as it is, and that becomes the pattern piece that you would need in order to sew and turn into a puff cuff. So those are basically the 3 steps to achieve visualization. You always start at the very end, or at least I start at the very end. This is how I suggest you do it too. You start with the design that you want to achieve, whether that's a really elegant dress, a shirt, even a simple shirt, a sleeve, a skirt. Whatever that original design is, you start there, you take it apart. So what basic pattern piece shapes do you need in order to get to that final product? And then, how does the basic pattern piece shape need to change to become the pattern piece that will become that final design, that desired result or design, what you started with? So step 1, we start with the design, the three-dimensional completed design that you're inspired by. You need to know next what your basic pattern piece shapes are, what their terms are, just because it makes it a little easier to look up shapes when you're starting out, what pattern piece shapes you need to be looking at in order to get to your desired result. So on the far left, we have a bodice, a front and back. And in most cases, when you are making a shirt, and sometimes even dresses require the bodice front and back. In fact, in most cases, they require a bodice front and back. But you'll learn about that later in Sewing Boss Accelerator. So bodice front and back if you're making a shirt or a dress. In most cases, when you're looking at a skirt design, you're going to start with a front and a back piece. You will always have a front and back of a skirt. And then a sleeve. In most cases, you'll have one sleeve pattern piece that turns into a sleeve all by itself. Yes, in some cases, a sleeve is 2 pieces, but just to keep it simple, for the sake of where we are right now, we're going to start with one piece, one basic pattern piece shape for a sleeve. And this is the first thing you're going to need to, the second thing that you're going to need to look at. First is the original design, and then what basic pattern piece shape you need to start with. So step 2, how does that basic pattern piece shape need to change to be the pattern piece shape you need? So here's an example. Say you want to draft a sweetheart neckline. And if you've never seen or you don't know what a sweetheart neckline is, that just simply is kind of a curvy edge on your neckline. Exactly what the highlighted line looks like here. You would start with the basic pattern piece shape. You would start with this specific shape because, as you'll learn later, that is what your pattern block, your bodice pattern block, is going to look like. And that is also something that you're going to learn when you enroll in Sewing Boss Accelerator. You'll start with the basic pattern piece shape. You're going to measure yourself, and then you're going to draft, using your drafting tools, draft those highlighted lines onto your bodice front. And then after the equal sign is what will happen to that shape. Once you lay that pattern piece onto fabric correctly, you're going to achieve that shape. That is the butterfly effect. After you have laid that pattern piece onto fabric and open it up, that is what you would have achieved. And that is essentially the act of visualization. We're going to do the same thing with a sleeve. If you want to make just a basic short sleeve, you would start with, obviously, the sleeve basic pattern piece shape. And based on whatever measurement you take, however far you want that line to be down your shoulder, you would measure yourself, use your drafting tools to create that line, and then after the equal sign, you would achieve that short sleeve that is on the other side of the equal sign. So to recap, visualization is the most important skill to have to draft your own pattern pieces from scratch. This skill is absolutely essential, and it's really mandatory no matter what your skill level. If you are beginner or expert and you're still kind of learning the process, I admit I'm also kind of learning the process, but this is the most important skill to have as a seamstress, no matter where you are in your experience level. And this is the ability to visualize the basic pattern piece shape that you will always start with, and how that shape needs to change to be the pattern piece you need to achieve the design you're trying to create. And using the automated strategy that you will learn about when you enroll in Sewing Boss Accelerator, you will always start from a basic pattern piece shape that we already talked about. And using the skill visualization, you will be able to determine pretty quickly what exactly that basic pattern piece shape needs to change to in order to create your desired result. So, what are your next steps after this presentation? Number one, if you are ready to keep learning, you are going to enroll in Sewing Boss Accelerator. And why is this the next step? Here's why. You're going to learn more about visualization. It's going to become more and more abundantly clear to you exactly how essential this skill is, and not only that, how easy it is to visualize the pattern piece shapes you need in order to create the clothing that you want to create. You're also going to learn the automated pattern drafting process that I have already adopted and use daily, and you'll learn that process from start to finish. And this, I guarantee you, is going to be the quickest and most efficient pattern drafting process that you have ever seen. And once you start using it, you will never look back. So just imagine you don't have to use commercial patterns anymore. You don't have to go out and buy a Simplicity or a McCall's. You don't have to spend hours pouring through a design book and looking for a design that matches what you're trying to do. Because believe me, I've been there, especially with cosplays, or I don't really like the designs in those books necessarily, but they are as close a match as I can make to what I'm actually trying to design. And that's essentially why I started drafting my own pattern pieces, because I was tired of matching things to my designs. If you're in that same boat and you just want to draft the pattern pieces that you want to draft and create the designs that you want without having to match them, then this is the program that you are looking for in order to learn the automated pattern drafting process. And not only that, you will no longer need those commercial patterns to tell you what fabrics or other materials you'll need for those projects. You'll not need to spend that extra money on that commercial pattern. You're not going to need to spend that much time opening it up, looking at the instructions, trying to figure out how to put it all together. You're not going to need to do any of that. You're going to learn how to make your own educated decisions on what fabrics will serve the designs that you want best, what materials you'll need, the closures that you want to use, the closures that will serve your designs best, and notions. And the notions, of course, include thread, buttons, patches, literally anything that is additional that you want to add to a very specific design that you have in mind. So not only will you be able to use this presentation to enroll in Sewing Boss Accelerator, and by the way, that is done using the link at the bottom of this, and also the button, any button on this page will lead you to Sewing Boss Accelerator right now. And I highly encourage you at this moment to enroll right now, because spots are limited and the price currently is significantly lower than it normally is. So right now is the perfect time to enroll in Sewing Boss Accelerator to keep learning, and you're going to get a full, complete, basic foundation of how all the pattern drafting works and how to make the automated pattern drafting process year-round and how much quicker and better it is. You're also going to have the opportunity to enroll in Order of Sewing Operations. And that is another course that I have created that essentially teaches you the very basics of how to put any sewing project together in a very fast amount of time. And this saves you a significant amount of time on trial and error. You're not going to be confused anymore about what to sew next and in what order. And if that's been a struggle for you, being able to know in what order to sew anything, because every project is different, this gives you a very basic foundation, a very strong foundation in what needs to happen first, in what order to sew anything, so that even if you're not going to miss any more steps. You're not going to have to go back and take out a seam. You're not going to make any more mistakes, and your trial and error will be cut down significantly after Order of Sewing Operations. And that is really the biggest gift I can give you, is being able to cut down on sewing time. And I say that because I've also had the same struggle with being able to cut down my sewing time. And with this course, you'll also have the promise that anything that you start, even if you give yourself a few days to create it, even if you're cut down for time, as naturally you would be, you have life, you have a job, you have family, so you just can't be sewing all the time. And sometimes your sewing time is just cut down significantly for other reasons. Order of Sewing Operations just makes it that much quicker to sew any project you can think of. There is a finite way to sew it all together in a very, very short amount of time. It significantly cuts your sewing time in half. Not even in half, just significantly. It takes days to complete a project, not even, sometimes just hours. That's how quickly it's going to go, and that's how quick that process is when you learn step by step what to do in what order. So click below. Any button on this page is going to take you to Sewing Boss Accelerator right now, and I highly encourage you to do it right now, because the longer you wait, the higher the price is going to go. So starting today, spots are always going to be limited. So if you are ready to learn, if you're ready to get into it, if you're ready to learn this automated pattern drafting process, which is going to save you significant time, money, and energy, then now is the time to enroll. Now is the time to get started, start learning, because even if you start right now, you're going to get so much faster in a short amount of time than if you waited. So don't wait any longer. Click the button. Any button on this page will take you to the page to get to enrolling on Sewing Boss Accelerator, and I will definitely see you inside. That's it for this presentation. I'm Kendra Weitzel. Come follow me on Facebook or Instagram if you don't already, and I will see you inside.